Live Jesus in our hearts forever. For the Catholics, in the name of in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Mayang magiliw, kaya sa silangan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiging, sa manlulupig, di ka masisi. Sa dagat at mundong sa simayan, sa langit mamakaw, may nilagang tulad, awit sa panlayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdidinig. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng buwan, ating pagsinta mo'y langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya lamang may mga mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Once again, good morning, everyone. InformNation is a countrywide effort to develop programs that engage key at-risk communities, media, non-government organizations, government, and academe to counter the narrative and influence of bad actors who use those communities or take advantage of fundamental vulnerabilities to spread false information and violent, criminal, or extremist ideologies through knowledge sharing, ideas exchange, debates, research presentations, and multi-sector campaigns. This Media and Information Literacy Summit aims to engage in a meaningful discussion about the opportunities, challenges, and power of media and information literacy in the new normal world. Now, to formally open the summit, let us welcome the Director of the De La Salle University Libraries, Ms. Christine Abrigo, to deliver the opening remarks.
Hi, good day. Thank you, Gab. On behalf of American Corner Manila De La Salle University Libraries, I warmly welcome everyone from across different time zones joining us today for our InformNation Summit. We are happy to see a large number of gathering from the student, library, and education communities in this virtual lobby. And rightly so, because our discussion theme today is something that we should all be taking part of. The summit's umbrella theme is information and media literacy advocacy, which includes the promotion of responsible media reporting, ethical journalism, and digital citizenship to counter disinformation. Today, we live in a highly digital environment where digital technology has become a huge part of our everyday life. Everything has become fast-paced, and information, whether authoritative or non-credible, processed or not, is circulated in seconds. We consume it as it comes, challenging our digital citizenship. And as defined by the DQ Institute, digital citizenship is the ability to use digital technology and media in safe, responsible, and effective ways. So whether we pay attention to it or not, we are being challenged. We have become vulnerable to this digital environment. We even detoxify from this environment from time to time to upkeep our online hygiene and well-being. As we deal with the upkeeping of our own digital lives, we are also called to be responsible users of information and be media literate, because we can take advantage of the same environment to influence, inspire, and spread positivity and collective intelligence, especially in our changing, now normal environment. For the informational professionals and educators, and I call out my colleagues in the library community, we are called higher to champion the cause of media information literacy advocacy. We have a bigger role to play in this universe. So let us focus more on this cause and be vigilant. I hope today's summit will leave with us with many practical takeaways to be truly inspired and empowered. We thank all of our resource speakers today, Dr. Alton, Dr. Alice, Ms. Yvonne, Dr. Joey, and Mr. Gab for giving their time, bearing time zone difference, to talk about our discussion points today. We are grateful to all of you. We thank our student partners from the Organization of American Studies, and of course, American Spaces Philippines, American Center Manila, U.S. Embassy in the Philippines for the support and for such an incredible program. Thank you very much and do enjoy the talks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Christine Abrigo, for welcoming everyone to the InformNation and Media Literacy Summit. Our speakers today are from different organizations that share a common goal, which is to counter disinformation through media literacy and promote critical thinking. We will be talking about several topics in this summit. So in our discussion, we're going to talk about information and media literacy for public good, truth decay and media literacy education, and ways to empower students like you and educators as well, protecting democracy, misinformation and trolls, and media and information literacy education in the Philippines, status and prospects. During the discussion, we will gather your questions from the chat box, so feel free to ask later at the end of the discussion. The speakers will answer your questions in our open forum segment. So without further ado, let's get into our first topic. The first speaker who will be talking about in our Media Literacy Summit is no other than Dr. Alice Fugi. Now, with the rise of democratization of media is the decay of truth and the increasing need to mainstream media literacy education, an essential component of protecting our democracy. Now, to dive in even further to the profile of our speaker for today, she is a policy researcher focused on K-12 education and the RAND Corporation. She studies policies that influence the academic and life opportunities of students who have been historically underserved by educational institutions. Her research explores a variety of topics, including evidence-based decision-making, media literacy, social and emotional learning, alternative teacher preparation programs, and inter-organizational relationships, among others. Now, prior to joining RAND, she was a postdoctoral research fellow at a School of Education and Social Policy at Northwestern University. She has a PhD in education policy from the University of Southern California in 2015. Her motivation to study education stems from 5 years teaching reading and history in Los Angeles middle schools. Let's all welcome, to talk about truth decay and media literacy education, Dr. Alice Fugi.
Thank you so much, Gab. I would have made my bio shorter if I knew you had to read it all, so I'm sorry. Thank you so much for inviting me to this event. It is already so well organized, and I'm really eager to learn from the other participants and attendees as we continue on tonight. For me, it's evening. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm going to get started and share my screen, if that's all right. I know that will disable it for others. Let's see. Okay. All right. I'm hoping everyone can see this. As you can tell from the, and actually I just saw 2 participants raise hands. I'm not good at multitasking. So Gab or Rana, if you need to interrupt me, please feel free. That's absolutely fine. As you can see from my first slide, I'm going to be talking about what we call at RAND truth decay. I'll get in a little bit deeper with that, but you can tell from this initial slide that I am primarily going to be speaking about the US context with our very dramatic US flag here falling apart. That's our truth decay logo. But while my work is primarily in the United States, I'm very interested in learning more from you all about truth decay in other regions. Excited to hear from other folks working outside of the US. So I just want to start by sort of setting the stage, talking about what we call truth decay. In these conversations, we certainly don't have to use that term, but there is a lot happening in terms of spreading disinformation, in terms of losing focus on facts and instead focusing on opinions. And by having this sort of shorthand, by calling it truth decay, it's easier than me every time listing each of these trends. So when I talk about truth decay, what do I mean? I'm talking about increasing disagreement about facts and data, blurring of the line between opinions and facts, increasing influence of opinions over facts, and finally, declining trust in respected sources of factual information. So these trends were identified about 5 years ago now in an excellent report that our president and CEO, Michael Rich, published called Truth Decay. And it looked at, if anyone is interested, I highly recommend reading it. It looks at these trends of truth decay, but also how they were seen in the past. So in the early 1900s, we had yellow journalism and other sort of eras where different forms of misinformation and disinformation were taking root. But there are a number of factors today that make it spread much quicker, which I'll also discuss. What are the consequences of truth decay? So if those are the trends that indicate we are experiencing truth decay, what's the problem with that? Just to be clear about, again, what I'm speaking of, first is the erosion of civil discourse. And I imagine what you all see online in the Philippines is probably similar to what I see here in the United States, which is I think erosion of civil discourse is the nicest way to put it. People having some difficulty communicating with one another. And when you go back to the previous slide and think about a lack of reliance on facts, it makes it more difficult to have these really important conversations that people can use in making decisions if we don't have common facts to return to. That leads to the next consequence, political paralysis, meaning people are have more difficulty making decisions. And this is everyday people, but also our policymakers who are in sort of a roadblock, if you will, and having to sort of work with their constituencies who may not necessarily believing things that are fact because people can't agree. Finally, that can lead to alienation and disengagement. I don't know, again, if this is something that you all have experienced, but many people in the United States will sort of check out altogether from the system. And that is a major challenge for democracy. We need to hear everybody's opinions and have everyone involved. And again, this also leads to uncertainty. So a lack of clarity about where we're going next and a lack of clarity about what is real. These are major challenges. So I know you can't read that, but I just want to show you sort of the larger picture of the system of truth decay. At the top, you'll see drivers of truth decay, and I'm going to zoom into that. These are issues that sort of contribute to the 4 trends I discussed initially and the consequences that I just touched on. So to zoom in on that, there are multiple reasons why we're experiencing this very difficult moment of misinformation and disinformation and propaganda. Some of this is just our cognitive biases. Our brains are built to sort of look for people and things that confirm our beliefs, but also changes in the information system. We've had rapid changes in the last 30 years that no one could have predicted that makes things spread quicker. And it also means that schools have a difficult time sometimes keeping up with these rapid changes. I was a teacher, as Gab mentioned in my bio, and I know when we were using books and curricula, it was typically from, a decade ago, and that doesn't cut it in a lot of cases today. So to speak to the education system, what I have highlighted here in yellow, which is what I focus on in my research, is education policy. The education system is also very overwhelmed with many, many demands, and increasingly so today. And then polarization also contributes, which is an increasing disagreement about issues. So people, rather than coming together, we're growing further apart. Agents of truth decay include the media, academia, political actors in government, and foreign actors. So at RAND, we have researchers sort of focusing on every one of these drivers. We have people looking into cognitive processes and biases and what kind of solutions could be found there. We have people looking at changes in the information system and also looking into, for instance, foreign actors and disinformation. We have some really good reports about kind of the propaganda that comes out of Russia, for example. And I'm on the team that really focuses on what are our educational solutions to truth decay. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And what we see as a promising solution, which I know is why everyone is here today, is media and information literacy. So thinking about media and information literacy, we needed to first get a good idea of the context of what's happening in the US. So we did some surveys. In 2019, we used something that we call the American Teacher Panel, and we surveyed teachers across the United States. The teacher panel is a very powerful tool that lets us reach out to teachers in a representative way. So we have teachers from all different regions. We have teachers who teach, in different kinds of demographic areas with different incomes. So we really get a good cross-section picture of what teachers across the US are thinking. So in 2019, we surveyed social studies teachers, and this is actually published by two of my colleagues, but I use this slide often. They wanted to know how big of a problem teachers in the US felt this was. And as you can see, some issues are larger than others. And you can see that many of these are actually bigger issues in secondary schools. So secondary here would be from about 14 years old to 18 years old. So if you look at the far left column, you can see this item. It asks teachers if they had experienced in the last year students making unfounded claims in class based on unreliable media sources. You can see that almost 50% of elementary school teachers reported this was the case. And secondary teachers, almost 90% of teachers said that they experienced this in their classroom. So it's frightening because this is not just happening with adults, it's also happening with our generations coming up, which is why we wanted to talk about education. And I just want to correct myself because I made an error. Secondary teachers are actually what we call middle and high school teachers. So that's more like around 11 years old to 18 years old. They're seeing more problems. If you look at the far right, there's another issue, another item that they responded to. With frequency saying they experienced it. Almost 60% of secondary teachers said that their students had shared hateful posts on social media. To learn a little bit more, my team then surveyed, and this is one that I took part in, we surveyed teachers across the US. This was not just social studies teachers. This time, this was teachers from all different subject areas. Again, we used the American Teacher Panel, and for this, we had about 1,500 teachers responding. So this is a pretty good snapshot of what teachers in the United States are thinking about. Later, I would love to hear from folks who are listening if this feels similar to what you're seeing where you're from as well. But one of the questions that we asked on this survey is, why aren't teachers doing more media literacy in their classrooms? And I have my thoughts on it, but that's not very useful if I don't know what teachers themselves are actually thinking. So we gave them actually 8 different options plus an other option so that they could let us know what might be getting in the way of their ability to teach media literacy education. So unfortunately, there were 6 of those 8 items that you can see here I've included, where more than 50% of the respondents said that this was an obstacle to them. This was something preventing them from implementing media literacy. Of course, the largest percentage was teachers saying they have too many other responsibilities to focus on media literacy. Again, this is something I'd like to hear how it relates to the areas that you're from, but teachers are expected to teach a lot and there's a lot of pressure to cover core content. So those two are really intractable problems, just meaning that they are problems with anything that we are trying to sort of introduce to teachers. There's always a little pushback because it's a very difficult problem to solve. But if you look further to the right, there are challenges that I think we can more directly address to help teachers in the US be better prepared and able to implement media literacy. So they said they have a lack of training and professional development, a lack of instructional resources, lack of guidance on programs, as well as on how to integrate media literacy into the classroom. So we see there are a lot of issues and we want to find ways with our research to contribute to solutions to these challenges. Before I move on to the next slide, I want to mention that the far right column here, a lack of guidance about how to integrate media literacy with existing classes. This is something we could do a whole nother presentation on. And instead we're doing sort of an overview, so forgive my brevity, but we believe, and the majority of experts in the US in media literacy, and several that I've talked to internationally, believe that integrating media literacy into classrooms is probably the most effective way to sort of bring these skills to fruition with students. Meaning, if we can integrate media literacy skills, like looking for credibility of your sources, or being careful about what you share until you know that it's real or true or based in fact, all of those kinds of competencies could be integrated into science class, math class, language arts class, social studies. It doesn't need to be isolated. So I think that's an important point to make, because that can help with the column that's in the far left, which is that teachers are really busy. They have a lot of responsibilities, and it might be more difficult to ask them to teach a whole additional class. But that's for another presentation. I'm just going to introduce quickly some of the work that we've done on media literacy, hoping that you might be interested in returning to this in the future to learn a little bit more. Starting in the far left, we did this report, we published this report, and I believe it was 2018, which was an initial exploration about how media literacy can be attached to this problem of truth decay, how it can be a solution. And we found that there were a lot of really amazing studies about media literacy out there, but there are also a lot of shortcomings in media literacy research currently, especially in the US. I think that some other countries might be a little bit further along in this work. But we don't have a lot of causal evidence about what kind of media literacy works in what situations. We have very, very good qualitative research on this, but it would be helpful, especially if we want to pass some kind of legislation. It's usually helpful to have some kind of causality behind those studies. And then if you look second to the left, there's another truth decay report. This one, we published media literacy standards. And this was to speak to the teachers' needs, to say, the ones who said they need more guidance, that they need more sort of professional development, a better understanding of what media literacy is. So we actually set out standards which capture the types of competencies and sort of define the boundaries for media literacy that we think are necessary for countering truth decay. And then on the far right, just to briefly mention, we have another report, again, to provide guidance to teachers, but also to provide guidance to researchers about how to generate more of that really rich evaluation data on media literacy education. For teachers, this is a guide that helps them understand how to best implement media literacy resources or media literacy concepts in their classrooms. And for researchers, that can help to sort of guide you through these evaluations. The reason why we wanted to bring it together is because it's a real challenge that we have practiced. So sort of teachers and schools and school leaders and districts, and then we have research, and they're very separate. So we wanted to publish something that brought those two parties together. Every chapter talks about the same topic, sort of from the teacher perspective and the researcher perspective. So I think it's a really valuable resource. And one more thing, in case you're interested, we also just published yesterday a set of media literacy lesson plans for middle grades. So we wrote these to specifically reach students who are around 11 to 13, which is middle school for us. But I think they could be used for younger grades and older grades if teachers are willing to perhaps modify slightly. We based these lessons on those truth decay standards that I mentioned on the previous slide. So one of the standards, for instance, is to slow down and be careful when you, and I'm paraphrasing this, but is to be careful with what you share, to only share information online or in person that you know is based on credible factual information. So one of the lessons in this set of lesson plans actually has students creating a TikTok video where they can share credible information and talk about facts that they learned. It also helps expose students to some of the public policy concepts in the US, and sort of how policy can affect everyday issues in their lives. I see all of these things as really melded together. Media literacy and sort of understanding that policy side, or what we could call civic education, those things are very closely linked, and we often at RAND talk about them in the same sentence, because all of it is about being better participants in democracy. So thinking about all the work that we've done in media literacy, I just wanted to offer a couple of sort of recommendations or implications for different communities. Again, I just want to say that I'm specifically speaking to the US context, but I'm really excited to hear how some of these lessons might comport with your contexts wherever you might be. So the first sort of recommendation is to implement some form of state standards and accountability policies that recognize the importance of media literacy. So in the US, unless something is sort of, well, there are positives and negatives to sort of having an accountability policy around any topic, but it typically will help push a certain kind of information or curriculum out if there's some sort of follow-up on it. So by accountability, that might be as simple as checking that schools are implementing some form of media literacy. But as we saw from teachers' responses, our governments, districts, policymakers at different levels really need to fund more and better media literacy training and materials for teachers. Right now, what we see, and I didn't get into details, but it's in one of the reports that I cited, what we see right now is that there's a very scattershot approach. So a lot of teachers are implementing what they see as some form of media literacy, but they sometimes don't know what media literacy really means, or it might mean different things to different people. So we're sort of on different pages, which is why we made the standards. They're implementing it in different ways. So some people might be focusing on actually giving full lessons. Some others might be integrating it. So things are all over. We need some training and sort of some common understanding and common language about media literacy. And I think I'm going over, so I'll be very quick. Finally, my recommendations would be to increase the number and quality of evaluations. And when I'm talking about evaluations, I mean research. As I mentioned, there is really good research out there. We need an additional push for research that is focused on really finding out rich information about what works in media literacy education, under what conditions, for whom. Another thing that we uncovered with some of our research is that there is a lot of inequity in who is receiving media literacy education. So schools with primarily students of color, so Black communities, for instance, might be receiving actually different media literacy focus than students who are attending primarily white schools, and that is absolutely unacceptable. So we need to know better what works where. We need it to be more equitably distributed. And then finally, build greater intersectoral collaboration in the United States. And I've talked with some other people internationally who felt this was similar. There's a lot of siloing. So people who research media literacy in education might not speak that much to people who are researching information literacy, who are in the School of Librarians, might not speak that much to people who are researching civic engagement, when all of these things really fit together. And then I also mean bringing in people from actual different sectors. So how can we reach out to people who are working in different departments, different fields? We see media literacy as a serious threat to our democracy. And so I think about other challenges that we're facing in the world that are serious threats. So think about climate change, for instance. We have people who are sort of championing climate change, people from all different industries. And we need that also for media and information literacy. With that, I will wrap it up. This is my name and my email address if you want to reach out to me with any questions or conversations. Please feel free to do so. And I really look forward to continuing our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alice Fugi, for that very insightful talk. We've learned a lot about the integration of media literacy in education to counter truth decay, particularly the challenges that it posed to democracies. And given the similarities between the Philippines and the US in terms of the challenges that both countries face in media literacy education, adopting those recommendations that you were citing earlier is really, really important. Before we actually proceed to the next speaker, maybe we can entertain one question from the chat. From our audience, if you have any question, please feel free to use the chat box here so that we can actually have a more interesting and engaging conversation with our expert here. But of course, later on, we will be having our panel discussion as well. So you will get to also unlock more learnings and conversations with our experts from the Media and Information Literacy field, or MIL. Okay, so I believe no one is asking a question. We will definitely reserve all of those questions during our open forum later on. So let us all give a virtual applause to Dr. Alice Fugi. Okay.
Thank you for inviting me, Gab.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hugi. We'll definitely have you later on. Now, with the rise of misinformation and trolls, researchers argue that we are now facing the next pandemic, the disinformation pandemic. Now, to talk about the topic is no other than the Associate Professor from College of Mass Communication, University of the Philippines, Miss Yvonne Chua. Let's all give her a warm virtual applause.
Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. At maraming salamat De La Salle University Libraries and American Corner Manila sa imbitasyon na maging bahagi ng InformNation. In the next few minutes, we'll briefly walk through the state of misinformation globally, or at least in 46 media markets. We'll then deconstruct the Philippine misinformation landscape. I'll let the numbers do most of the talking, as they'll help us detect patterns and hopefully give us a better handle of the problem, as well as help us identify areas of intervention. And then finally, we'll examine several predictors of truth discernment so that we could end this session on a hopeful note. But first, let's clear up some terms: misinformation, disinformation, and trolling. Disinformation studies make a distinction between misinformation and disinformation. Both, of course, refer to the creation, production, and distribution of false information. But misinformation is devoid of intent to harm, while the goal of disinformation is to deceive, create harm, or to make a profit. This morning, we'll use the term misinformation to refer to false or misleading narratives regardless of the intention. Trolling, on the other hand, entails the spread of disinformation or malinformation through the use of inflammatory or offensive messages to provoke emotional or verbal responses. What is malinformation, you might ask? It's the facts or truth that is unjustifiably brought out in the public with the sole intention of harming a person. For example, your personal life, including your personal data. So how widespread is misinformation? Worldwide, or at least in 46 media markets, 73% of adults said they have been exposed to false or misleading information on a range of topics, from the pandemic and politics to climate change and immigration. The finding comes from the survey conducted early last year for the Digital News Report of the Reuters Institute. By the way, I was involved in the study, and I will be involved again in this year's study. With the exception of Singapore, all the Southeast Asian countries covered in the study, the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia, ranked above the global average and were in the top 15. The Philippines, which I've marked out in red, placed second after Peru. In this study, 89% of Filipinos said they have seen false or misleading information. The Philippines makes a good case study of misinformation, especially digital misinformation. So remarkable was the systematic deployment of keyboard warriors, or another word for trolls, on social media in 2016 to boost the candidacy of then-candidate Rodrigo Duterte, that a Facebook executive called the Philippines patient zero. This was months ahead of Brexit, when the Brits voted to pull out of the European Union, and the American elections that saw a mind-boggling volume of disinformation, trolls, and bots. Internet troll farms or troll armies are by now a permanent fixture in our information landscape. Studies, mostly based on anecdotal evidence and confessions, have traced their origins, identified work models, warned of their possible expansion to elections in other countries, and again found evidence that they were at work in the just concluded general elections. But because of tighter regulation by platforms and the takedown of networks of false accounts, many troll farms in the Philippines now operate using real identities. They include verified accounts or those with your familiar blue marks. These accounts are sometimes bought in the hundreds of thousands of pesos. There's another thing about Filipino trolls. They're not only famous for their online vitriol, but some actually engage full-time in just amplifying positive messages about their clients. There are many reasons it's so easy to push misinformation these days and why we fall for it. And I'm sure you know these reasons as well. In the interest of time, let's just go over a few of them. Thanks to technology, everyone can be a publisher. As they say, social media is the new Gutenberg. That means an explosion of information, both good and bad. Platforms rely on algorithms to filter the information, relying on your search preferences and online activities instead of giving priority to quality information when pushing posts or articles to your news feeds. This, in turn, creates echo chambers that feed off certain cognitive biases. Numerous studies have discussed how cognitive biases make us more susceptible to suspicious claims. For example, we're inclined to consume information that is aligned with or reinforces our beliefs or convictions and reject those that don't. That's what psychologists call confirmation bias. So the like-minded stay together in the echo chambers. The illusory truth effect has also been used to explain the persistence and virality of falsehoods. A lie, when repeated many times, becomes truth for some people, or repeated exposure to falsehoods might make you believe it's the truth. To quote an infamous lady, perception is real, truth is not. That's the law of propaganda. FOMO, or the fear of being left out from a rewarding experience, has also been found to lead to compulsive social media usage and misinformation sharing behavior. And misinformation will never go away as long as the rewards remain big. Power and position for politicians and firms, fame and prestige for influencers and celebrities, and profits even for ordinary people. For many adult Filipinos, misinformation comes chiefly from public officials and politicians, whether it's about the pandemic, politics, or other topics, according to the findings of the Digital News Report for 2020 and 2021. And while they used to consider both journalists and ordinary people as the second source of misinformation in 2020, that changed last year when they perceived ordinary people to be behind false or misleading narratives more than journalists. But one thing that we should be doing is to classify the actors based on their actual role. This would help us determine who should be ultimately accountable for the prevalence and scale of misinformation we're wallowing in. There are the instigators. These are the real sources and beneficiaries of misinformation. They are the creators or producers of misinformation who have the resources to pay for and set up misinformation operations. But they are often the unseen hand. In the Philippines, studies have identified them to be the state, politicians, and advertising, PR, and digital marketing firms. They often operate in collaboration with one another. The agents, on the other hand, are the faces of misinformation we come across regularly on social media. They are the distributors or spreaders that are part of the misinformation machinery set up by instigators. They may suggest or are instructed to use techniques like trolls, bots, sock puppet networks, and false identities. To this group belong digital influencers and celebrities, trolls, grassroots people or intermediaries such as volunteers, and ordinary people eager to earn an extra buck or two. Because of their high visibility, they're almost always the ones who get sued or vilified, while the instigators, the real masterminds, go scot-free. As you see in this chart, false or misleading information encompasses a wide range of topics. Understandably, because of the pandemic, the large chunk, or 63%, was about the coronavirus in last year's digital news report. But when you remove the coronavirus, then it's politics, 57%, followed by celebrities, 47%. This year's digital news report will be out soon, and it shows politics overtaking the coronavirus as a top topic. Of course, that's no surprise given it's an election year. Misinformation has been found to be more effective when it builds on genuine information or truth. And malign actors know that full well and take advantage of that. In the study on vaccine information that my colleague, Professor Labiste, and I did last year, we found that only a third of the narratives we sampled were outright fabrications. Vaccine-related misinformation analyzed in our study was mostly manipulated, such as altered photos or videos, or reconfigured, such as text or image that was decontextualized or taken out of context. A few slides earlier, I mentioned how disinformers and trolls engage in both negative and positive messaging. This chart shows how it worked in the May 9 elections. Candidates A and B were targets of false or misleading narratives during the campaign, but the narratives were preponderantly in their favor. That's the exact opposite for candidates C and D. Just like for other types of information, visual content is key when it comes to misinformation. Bad actors pushed a lot of vaccine misinformation through videos and photos. The same holds true for electoral misinformation. Notice that the proportion of misinformation in text actually dropped significantly from 26% as of February 1, before the start of the campaign period, to 15% or a week before the campaign period closed. Whether it's about vaccines or the elections, the chief enabler of misinformation in the country is Facebook. Two-thirds of false or misleading narratives covered by our studies appeared in Facebook. Again, this is no surprise, given that the top social media platform in the country is Facebook. Note, however, the swift rise of TikTok as a platform of disinformation in the 2022 elections. It tied with YouTube and led Twitter as of the end of April. Cross-posting has also risen, with 29% of false or misleading claims that we studied in connection with this year's elections appearing in two or more platforms. That means an even bigger and wider audience for misinformation. Agents of misinformation do not operate in isolation. They attract people to join networks of misinformation that function as spreaders of large volume of false content. Coordinated behavior was observed in the number of groups that shared a single false or misleading claim during the May 9 elections. This gives the impression that the claim had multiple sources when it actually didn't. Available data that we got for our study show that 3 in 5 narratives circulated in more than 50 Facebook pages and groups. One claim was shared by as many as 2,200 groups. As a result of this coordination, a big majority, or 84% of the claims, generated total interactions, likes, shares, comments that exceeded 1,000. In fact, 1 in 8 claims generated interactions exceeding more than 100,000. So far, the biggest interactions that we came across in our study added up to 7 million. Our findings reinforce earlier studies on the extent of networked disinformation in the Philippines. They also show that platforms need to do a lot more than take down a few hundred accounts once a year for coordinated inauthentic or other suspicious behavior. We earlier looked briefly at technology, cognitive biases, and motivations as among the reasons misinformation thrives. Let's now try to examine other reasons that make Filipinos easy targets of disinformers. There are 92 million social media users in the Philippines as of January 22. That's about 8% of the population. Social media has become the chief source of information and of news among Filipinos. Yet, a social weather station survey last December found that 51% of adult internet users found it difficult to spot fake news or misinformation online. Two studies, meanwhile, confirm the low competency of students in verifying online information. Bosses Pilipinas, a research group, reported that 67% of college students scored poorly in a fake news quiz it had administered. A study of senior high, college, and postgraduate students in the Bicol region placed their competency on author checking, fact checking, and bias checking at the beginner's level. That study underscored the need to teach students appropriate and systematic information processing strategies, critical thinking skills, journalism ethics, in order to navigate better online information. The Bosses Pilipinas study also found that young Filipinos with partisan tendencies and who doubt mainstream media are also more likely to fall for misinformation. Meanwhile, Filipinos are known to be the biggest followers of influencers and vlogs, many of which are bearers of falsehoods rather than of truth. Just imagine how much greater the challenges are in fighting misinformation when we take into account the fact that 32% of Filipinos are still offline and may need as much, if not more, help at telling truth from falsehoods propagated online. Let's not end on a gloomy note, however. Permit me to share the findings from a study of 16 countries in 6 continents, including the Philippines, that I've been reading lately. It may point us to possible responses or areas of intervention in countering misinformation. The authors identified 6 factors associated with a person's capacity to discern truth. These are: 1. When one resorts to analytic thinking than their intuition when evaluating information. 2. When one gives importance to finding reliable evidence-based information. 3. When one is prompted or nudged to seek accurate information. 4. When one is provided some form of digital literacy, no matter how minimal. 5. When one engages in crowdsourced fact-checking. And last but not least, when the person values democracy. What the findings emphasize is the need to impart not only skills, but also values that will develop in people the mindset and appetite for truth. Thank you everyone for listening, and may the facts be always with us.
Okay, thank you so much, Miss Yvonne, for your magnificent talk about misinformation and trolls. We definitely learned a lot about the rise of new platforms where this information thrives, as well as network distribution, and of course, the deeper challenges that we are facing as a country in terms of media literacy education. Now, before we proceed even further, we have two questions to ask. Coming from our audience, the first question is, how can we control misinformation? Are there laws that penalize those who promote misinformation and disinformation? Miss Yvonne, can you please answer this question?
Okay, thank you. The question entails, will take us forever to answer, maybe a whole day workshop, just to pinpoint the various steps that different sectors can do. But what we do know that since misinformation is a societal problem, then it would entail a whole of society approach. That much we know. And that media and information literacy should also address that. It should be wide scale and it should be sustainable. As to laws, we have, of course, laws that penalize or punish false utterances. This dates back to the Commonwealth era when we were still a colony of the US. As you know, the fines have been updated. So it's more, you spend jail time as well as fines have been increased to penalize false utterances. However, we don't have a law specific to misinformation. Should we have one? I think that's worth discussing later on. My own take is we have quite a number of laws that have been used to regulate, say, libel or information that imputes a vice, defect, or that defames somebody else. And these haven't actually been put to good use. So in this instance, should we have more laws that are directed at fake news or false information or misinformation? My concern is our experience with the laws that have been introduced in Congress is they define fake news rather broadly. And that means that anybody can be vulnerable or susceptible to being unjustifiably hailed to court for that. Number two, it also fails to take into account the proposed laws or the bills pending in Congress also fail to take into account that there is a hierarchy, as I pointed out. And what might happen is we're going after the low-hanging fruits, which means the people who are more visible rather than the real masterminds, the state, our PR firms, our politicians. And I don't think that the politicians would like to have a law that would regulate, or or would go after them. That's something we tried, I think, in the past Congress. There was a senator who proposed, or the committee proposed, that regulation against misinformation should be directed at, among others, public officials who deliberately engage in such activities. And that was, of course, not received well. So as to controls, perhaps something that's worth looking into would be not legislation, but, well, something else that would also regulate or hold platforms more accountable or liable for the distribution of misinformation, hold public officials, like I said, more accountable, since they are, after all, gatekeepers of a lot of information in the public domain. So I hope I answered that, but like I said, this would take a whole day.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yvonne. Actually, we have a lot of questions here in the Q&A, but we're only going to entertain two. And I think this question is going to cover at least a couple of the questions that they have here. Our participants have been itching to ask, what are your practical tips in terms of spotting fake news, and what should they do right off the bat once they see that a certain information is actually false?
Okay. Spotting, this is where education comes in, whether in the formal system or the non-formal system. It's important to show people how to spot false information But first, I believe that there should be awareness that they are exposed to false information. Some people are under the belief or misnotion that they will never be victims of false information. So first, there should be acceptance that we are awash in misinformation, and that anybody can be a victim, even the most, or people who think they are the most learned among us. So that's one thing, would be acceptance. Number two is there are certain attributes of false information. However, like I mentioned, a lot of this also would take on the truth, a kernel of, or a grain of truth, making it more difficult for people to actually spot misinformation or false or misleading narratives. Like if you see a picture and it's been just altered slightly, not many people can detect that right away. So we need to spend time educating people, and educating a core of trainers to help people to do that. But like I said, this is going to take a lot. Um, but what I'd like to emphasize is the importance of, one, awareness. Two is to develop in people a questioning mind, a mindset where they would question everything, every piece of information that comes their way, even from what they perceive or who they perceive to be the most credible sources. Because credible sources can also get it wrong, or can deliberately make information, intentionally make it incorrect because they know they're credible. So we have to have a questioning mind. As far as so an inquisitive mind, a curious mind, and I've been involved in one particular project that I really pushed very hard for. It's one. I'm a fact checker, and one of my jobs is to call out wrong information. But that's my job as a professional fact checker. In the real world, you can't just call out anyone because they got it wrong. That's the last thing you'd like to do. Instead, what you'd like to do is to be empathetic, to actually let people know that I was also a victim, you could also be a victim, we're all victims, and that we should try to find a way out as much as possible collectively. Let's do it together. And I think that would work when it comes to young people, older people, communities, and especially, I think some people mentioned those who belong to the lower socioeconomic classes, where they might feel slighted, or they might feel that you're insulting their intelligence. So yes, Jeremy, I agree. Empathy is essential, especially in our cancel culture today.
Okay, thank you so much, Miss Yvonne, for those practical tips. And of course, I love the angle of having a questioning mind. It's really very important that we adopt critical thinking, especially now these days. It's so difficult to really ensure that all of the media content and information we consume online are actually true. But before we move forward, I believe Dr. Alice Fugi actually has some insights to add to the questions earlier. Dr. Alice?
My dogs are barking in the background. I'm sorry. So I was muted. I second everything that Dr. Yvonne shared. She's very insightful, and I appreciate the nuance. I think there were some questions about like what can we practically do in schools that I would be interested in talking about later, but we don't need to go into yet. And then I did post in the Q&A just one response. This is not as nuanced as what we just discussed, but the Poynter Center has tried to track laws and legislation to prevent misinformation spreading. I mentioned, just to sort of take it with a grain of salt, because things are always changing. It's hard to maintain something like this up to date, and it's also hard to capture sort of smaller specifics, but it might give you sort of an interesting look at how different countries are trying to address the problem of misinformation.
Alice, I need to fact check you. I don't have a doctorate,
Oh, yeah.
So Yvonne is just
fine. Oh,
fine.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I
I'm
love
sorry.
that.
Well, you should have an honorary one. I really appreciated all of your responses. Every time I wanted to jump in, I was like, oh, she already said it. Never mind.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alice and Miss Yvonne, for those insights and information. And of course, we can see that our participants are very eager to engage with our speakers. They're actually asking a lot of questions in our Q&A. So we will give you that particular privilege. Feel free to drop all of your questions in the chat box, the Q&A. We will park them for now, but we will definitely go back to them during our open forum or open panel discussion later on, because we still have one more speaker. So where are we exactly in our plight for media literacy education in the Philippines? What is the current state of our initiatives, particularly in terms of educating the public? And what kind of programs are we trying to reach grassroots impact, especially those 30% that Miss Yvonne was talking about earlier, those that are not even online? So let me introduce our third speaker for this summit. Our next speaker is currently the President Emeritus of PAMIL and Regional Representative for Asia Pacific at the UNESCO MIL Alliance, or Media and Information Literacy Alliance. He is one of the pioneers in MIL training in the Philippines. He started his career in media education in 1986 to 87 as part of the Community Communications Program of Communication Foundations for Asia. In 2013, he was among the international experts invited to Paris, France by UNESCO to develop and validate MIL indicators. Before the start of the K-12 curriculum, he conducted MIL workshops for teachers as a book author. He finally founded the Philippine Association for Media and Information Literacy, or what you call PAMIL, in 2018 to sustain the MIL movement. And a year later, he was chosen by the U.S. Department of State to participate in IVLP, or the International Visitor Leadership Program, to observe and undergo MIL training in 5 key states in the U.S., among several achievements in the area of media and information literacy. Now, to talk about media and information literacy education in the Philippines, the status and the prospects, let us call on our next speaker, Dr. Jose Rioben Alagaran II.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm using my phone now because I was having a difficulty earlier to connect, but just the same, I'd like to proceed with my presentation. So as mentioned, it is about media and information literacy education in the Philippines, status and prospects. My presentation for today will basically focus on the fund sector. Next slide. I'd like to provide you initially with, next slide, with the context of MIL education in the Philippines, just so everyone would know how it all started in the Philippines. So it actually started with some church documents, the likes of Aitatis Novae and Communio et Progressio, where basically it highlighted important role to play in youth formation. And because of men's different Catholic schools in the Philippines mission or were instructed to offer media, and then this was picked up by the different church-based organizations to include Communication Foundation for Asia, which started offering media education as a non-formal training in the 80s. And then this was offered to the out-of-school youth. And then after some time, UNESCO went on to draft the very first declaration related to media education that was held in Grunwald, Germany. And they realized after some time that there's a need to converge media literacy and information literacy. The reason why I decided to publish the edition of UNESCO MIL Curriculum for Teachers in 2011. And then the Department of Education in the Philippines decided to offer MIL as a required core course in the senior high school. But of course, we need to understand that at the time, the concept of M really that clear yet until the fake news in 2017. So it came around in the 2017. So people started they realized the need for MIL because of news phenomenon. And then our Association Media and Information Literacy was put up in 2018, and then later last year, the second edition of the UNESCO MIL curriculum for teachers came out. To this time include digital literacy of IL. No? There were chapters in the previous, but this time the digital literacy has been as an important component of IL. So there are three areas now. So media literacy, information literacy, and digital literacy. Next slide. I came across this PubMed. Media and information literacy is literacy. This is such a strong message to everyone that literacy, apart from the usual reading, writing, and arithmetic. But how do we integrate MIL in these three areas? Or hello there. Can you hear me now?
Hi, Dr. Joey. Yes, you're a bit chopping off, but we can hear you. Can you try to speak again?
Am I audible? Hello there.
Yes, sir, we can hear you, but you were cutting on and off.
All right. I'd rather turn off my cam for the meantime.
Yes.
Right. So to hear me, I'm already looking. Okay. Thank you much. So I was saying, MIL can also be in PRs, not all know of. Like, for example, when we get to read newspaper, magazines, books, and the like, to read them critically. When we compose articles, letters, among others, we should be rightfully, ethically, and arithmetic, we should be able to
Dr. Joey, are you still here? Oh,
Hi there. Sorry. Hello.
yes, we can hear you, sir.
Sorry about
Okay.
that. All right. So I will make it fast. All right. I'm already discussing profile of MIL teachers. A few years back, PAMIL decided to conduct a survey among MIL teachers in the country so that we will be able to know the training needs of these teachers. And these were participated by 682 MIL teachers all over the country. Next slide. And as regards the areas for areas covered in the survey, we have the following areas of competencies. We have access, retrieval of media and information, evaluation, understanding of media and information, use, create, communicate media and information, which are all important competencies being promoted by UNESCO. Next slide. And in terms of the knowledge level, so we look at the following. So most of the participants got this knowledge areas correctly, that MIL is both the content and the process. MIL is about understanding how media works in a democratic society. MIL includes evaluation of media information, that MIL is brought about by media convergence, that it is not about media bashing, and that it empowers audiences to use and produce media information more responsibly. Next slide. However, there are top 4 incorrect answers, and this is about MIL is about the use of media in aid of instruction. I will explain this some more later on. And that MIL is a domain of information technology, which definitely it is not. And the MIL is about educational technology. Again, this is not about educational technology, although it's the use of technology to create messages is part of it. And then it is also not a production course. No. Next slide. In terms of the, okay, hello. In terms of the training needs, next slide. So we have the following top 7 topics which were identified by the participants. So they want further training on the following. We have developing search strategies, search processes to find media information, because there are techniques now that are being used to be able to get the right information, more censorship, regulation, audiences, economic, legal, privacy, and security issues of media information, identifying the media information for a particular purpose, evaluating currency, relevance, accuracy, and quality of the retrieved media information, which includes how to be able to evaluate news, as mentioned by Professor Chua and Dr. Chua, selecting and synthesizing media and information, identifying and interact with bodies that regulate media information, and using the relevant acknowledgement style standards. So these are the things that have been identified to be most important areas for training. Next slide. So as far as the curriculum guide of the Department of Education is concerned, the course description is correct because this was developed in collaboration with Ramon Tuason, who co-authored the MIL curriculum in 2011 and also in 2021. So the course introduces the learners to basic understanding of media and information as channels of communication and tools for the development of individuals and society. It also aims to develop students to be creative and critical thinkers, as well as responsible users and competent producers of media and information. This is correct. But according to the Asian Institute of Journalism and Communication, it must be known, however, that the curriculum guide is more focused on technology as teaching learning tool centric, which means that there were hardly some items related to information literacy, with some references, of course, to new media and social media. So these portions differ from UNESCO's broader definition of MIL. These consistencies with the composite concept of MIL contribute to the misconceptions about the course as education technology related and authored by UNESCO. Next slide. And then another study conducted by a student of the Asian Institute of Journalism and Communication. It's a qualitative study on MIL teachers from public and private schools in the Philippines, found that the teachers' understanding of the course appears to be limited to basic concepts of production, media use, and the use of technology in accessing information. Some teachers have also expressed concerns on the dominance of media production teaching over the critical analysis of the media messages. In interviews, several teachers noted that students should learn to understand first the media messages before jumping into the activity of making a video, a documentary, or short film. Next slide. There is also a misconception that the MIL course should focus on mass media. This could be attributed to the technology-focused and mass media-centric MIL curriculum guide in the senior high school program, which the academia should address together with the Department of Education. This is different from UNESCO's broader definition of MIL as a set of competencies that empower citizens to access, retrieve, evaluate, and use, create, as well as share information and media content in all formats, using various tools in a critical, ethical, and effective way in order to participate and engage in personal, professional, and societal activities. So what are the concepts that are now integrated, next slide, in the new UNESCO Curriculum 2021? And again, in the process of revising the curriculum guide, we hope that these concepts will also be integrated in the revision. Access to information is a basic human right and need. With increased access to digital communication and content, so there is a need for increased capacities. Social media should promote social trust, highlight verified information, and counter hate speech. Skills to understand, interpret, and ethically engage with content across all types of providers has to be a priority concern, leaving people's critical competency through MIL, international development agenda. So maybe this can be part of the applications where the MIL now is going to be used to be able to promote the sustainable development goals. Next slide. MIL gives people the competencies to be able to think critically about the following content they receive and share with others. The providers they use, the role in communicating for HR or human rights, and sustainable development. Empower people in all walks of life to find, evaluate, and use content effectively. Promote dialogue and respect for the views and cultures of others. And whether the content provider is a library, archive, museum, or digital communication company, every individual should evaluate content based on how it is produced, the messages and values being conveyed, and the intended audiences or purposes. So in terms of curriculum design considerations, we're proposing that the curriculum framework of the curriculum guide must be based on the UNESCO framework in terms of its rationale, description, and concepts. At the same time, I know that this is already being done by Department of Education, but maybe the focus in terms of competencies should be access, evaluate, and create, which are the three major area clusters of clusters of topics that are supposed to be there in the revision of the MIL guide. That MIL is a composite concept. It's not just about media literacy. It's not just about information literacy, nor about digital literacy, but altogether, they play a very important role in empowering individuals to be more discerning and more critical about media messages. That MIL is also a life skill, that this is something that we need to embrace from womb to tomb, from cradle to grave. That MIL is also for public good, that it is supposed to cater to the needs of the great majority, and that MIL is for all. Okay, next slide. Next slide. We have other considerations that it is indeed an ecosystem. It is not just about media literacy, news literacy, and film literacy, but these are all working together, trying to contribute to the development of individuals, how to make them more critical audiences of mass media. That it is not a production course. That, by the way, when the MIL curriculum guide was developed and was conceptualized in 2013, it was originally conceived as a communication course. not an education course because of the term literacy there. It is not an IT course. If you are going to look back at the area where MIL is lodged, it is a communication area. MIL includes protection and empowerment perspective. So, which means that it is not just about being able to equip yourself um, with skills to combat misinformation, disinformation, but more importantly, how to make important decisions out of the evaluation that you have made. No? And then it should also combat stereotyping, and it should promote cross-cultural communication. Next slide. So this is the ecosystem that I'm talking about. I think there are 11 of them working together as a composite concept of MIL. Then to next slide, according to Professor Son, who co-authored the book in 2011 and in 2021. These are the things that should be highlighted in the revision of the MIL curriculum. We have to include topics related to cyber wellness, psychosocial impact of technology, news values, disinformation strategies and tools, intercultural dialogue to counter hate speech and extremism, addressing historic revisionism, information ethics, persuasive communication, and algorithmic literacy. Slide. So what then are the ultimate outcomes of IL for students? We want to make them responsible, ethical, in the use of technology and social media, and also critical. We want them critical consumers and users of information and media messages across all types of media platforms. So hello. So hello.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
I hope you can hear me now. So
Yes.
I'm now going to discuss the criteria of the Center for Media Literacy. Thank you. So this time, I'd like to also share what the Center for Media Literacy developed in terms of criteria for. However, this is just about media literacy instruction. So teach about the media and not just with media. Help students understand media as a system of representation for oneself and others. Engage students in critical reading and writing of media text. Not so maybe on production, although creation is part of MIL. But again, I said that focus on more effectiveness and at the same time create messages through technologies. It's not the use of technology per se, but it is about how messages are created using technologies. And then foster habits of critical thinking, which can motivate students to engage in sustained inquiry with media text, or provide opportunities for practice with key media literacy questions. It was mentioned by Dr. Sorry, Yvonne earlier that there is a need for more critical questioning. I support that idea because really, one reason why we have not been so media literate is because we have not been questioning media. I think we should be able to start questioning media. Encourage students to examine media from multiple perspectives, including differing audience viewpoints. Encourage students to engage personally, not just intellectually, in making meaning from the media they consume and produce. All these can be converted into important competencies to guide the revision of the curriculum guide. Next slide. Okay, so what then is the suggested general outline for curriculum guide in the Philippines? I personally believe that these are the four major topics that should be included in the curriculum guide. Introduction, which could constitute 20 hours. Accessing media information, which is good for 16 hours. The area where we have to give more time to, because we really need to equip them with critical analysis skills. So that's going to be for 24 hours. And last is creating media and information. Next slide. So what are some of the topics that can be included? For the introduction, we can discuss basic concepts, evolution, types of media and information, functions, ownership and operations, and of course, MIL in a democratic society. For the second chapter on media and information, we can call define and articulate needs, organize story and information. Third chapter, we analyzing and evaluating media and information, which includes understanding media language. Media has its own language also. The need to decode, learn. And this also includes codes, conventions, uh, try to engage all of us, how to attract attention, analyze and evaluate media messages, implementations, which incidentally is not the current curriculum guide. And information, which includes false news, although understandable because the fake news, quote unquote, phenomenon came around 2017 after the first out of the K to 12. And last chapter will be about creating media information. Okay, so sorry about that. I'm already in my last chapter of the post out, creating media information. We can include topics how to use, create, and share information for civic engagement and lifelong learning and social purpose. So what are some of the general premises that I propose that the guide should highlight legal framework, which is already, but I think we have still defined the critical thinking through critical inquiry approach, just to again give importance to what was said earlier about the need for critical thinking and critical questioning. Integrates other 21st century skills. I know that this is also one of the major concerns of the Department of Education. And hello, and also integrate reflective thinking and analyzing MIL practices. I'm already on my last few slides. So this is now how to be able to move forward. So first step, next slide, is to review and revise media information literacy curriculum guide. Although I know this is already under review, they have completed the review up to K10 courses, but since MIL is part of either 11 or 12, although in the original plan it's part of 12, so grade 12, so it might still take some time. So that's the first step. Second step, so how do we revise? We are proposing that we need to take out the educational technology part there in part 2 of the curriculum guide. Reorganize topics into part 1 introduction, part 2 media information literacy access, Part 3, Media and Information Literacy Analysis. Part 4, Media and Information Literacy Creation. Next slide. When there is a correct interpretation of MIL, naturally, there is a better understanding of it as a concept and as a process, because it is not just a concept that we can teach as a standalone course. What we're looking at now is how to be able to integrate it across the curriculum, because you also consider MIL as a process. That this leads to correct practice 2 of MIL and will help us to be practiced. Next slide. Second step, I mentioned already the need to integrate MIL across the curriculum. In fact, in the MIL education in Asia, there is a mention there about the need to introduce it in the early years of basic education, not just in the senior high school, because we know for a fact that even at a young age, even a toddler at that, could easily manipulate or could easily operate a mobile phone. And then this is applicable as a content in a process in subjects related to the following, and among others, communication arts, social studies, history, values, education. I think I saw a message earlier. Yes, definitely, it can be integrated in values education. The fact that we are using media, we are regularly using media, and therefore we get a lot of values out of media messages. Next slide. Create media and information literacy department or area in the schools. I'd like to appeal to the Department of Education. I hope they would be able to consider the idea of creating an IL department. It shouldn't be lodged in IT because it's never really meant as an IT course. Even IT teachers that I interviewed, they said that it's not their cup of tea. So it is not supposed to lodge in the IT department or English department. I hope in the future the DepEd would create MIL department in the school. Because there are materials now being produced by different groups, also non-government organizations. As a fourth step, we'd like to propose curation of materials into an open, shared online platform for easier access by all stakeholders, especially MIL teachers and students. This is also a suggestion of
Dr. Joey, are you here?
hello.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
I'm on my last 2 slides. Okay, I'm on my last 2 slides already. I'm done with the third, fourth step. I'm to fifth step. Okay. So for the fifth step, this time we like to propose the development of a national media and information literacy policy in the Philippines. That this is not only this does not only DepEd or even the higher Commission on Higher Education, because there are MIL courses being offered now in the college course. But we should also include DIC, because remember, DICT conducts training of digital literacy, harmonize the work on mass media, information and comtech, public common information, telecoms, library and art, historical and national heritage, culture, privacy commission, others. If we only come together, really be able to come up with a national media information literacy to guide in the way we should be consuming and producing messages different groups. They all perform MIL-related functions as producers and consumers of information and media for the people. So for this one, as they have, state would have hello. So I'd like to end with this. I'd like to end this six step. So I'd like to say, as in any to practice IL every now and then, we should be able to apply MIL skills and that we should continue and sustain IL movement. So I like what is happening now, that more and non-government organizations engage in media and information literacy. And my last slide. So this was taken from the UNESCO MIL curriculum brochure, that we need to stop being spectators and targets of these communications as creative subjects empowered with critical thinking and new capacities. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for bearing with me. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Joey, for sharing to us the ideal.
Thank you.
Yes, sir? Okay. So don't leave us yet, Dr. Joey, because we still have more questions coming up from our audience. Thank you so much for sharing to us the ideal MIL curriculum design in the Philippines. This is a very timely discussion for us, especially that we need to rally for more integrations in our primary and secondary education for MIL. And on a personal note, I love the idea of having an MIL hub in schools or having a separate MIL department, that we don't have to actually transfer the responsibility to the IT or English department. But before we jump into our open forum, I have one question that I like particularly to pick up from our audience, Dr. Joey, if you're still here. One question that stood out is, MIL seems to be taken care of in schools, definitely benefiting students, but how about those out-of-school youth or individuals, and even for other members of communities who are equally gullible for disinformation? Do we have some mechanisms to educate them? Dr. Joey, are you here? Okay, I believe Dr. Joey is
Hello?
not. Okay, yes, sir.
The output for use of for yeah, the output
Okay, Dr. Joey, the audio is cracking up. I think there's a technical glitch. We will definitely get back to you later on. We will now proceed with our open forum for now, and then we will call you back later to entertain the question again. Okay? Now, for everyone, at this particular point in our program, we will now invite our speakers, Dr. Alice Fugi, Ms. Yvonne Chua, and Dr. Joey, for our panel discussion. Now, if you have any questions for our panelists, please do send them our way to the Q&A facility here in Zoom. And if you'd like a specific panelist to answer your question, please do mention their name first in a message, then continue with a question. Kindly note that not all questions may be addressed because of time concerns or the appropriateness of the question. But while we're waiting for our participants to send the questions, we have the guide questions here, and let's also call on our panel speakers to our virtual stage.
I'm here, Gab, but I cannot turn on my video, it says.
Okay, definitely. Okay, that's okay, Dr. Alice. Okay, and I guess Dr. Joey is also back. Let us have our first question for our panel speakers. The first question that we're going to ask is, what are the pressing issues and challenges facing MIL? And what are the possible solutions to the identified issues? Who would like to answer this first? Dr. Alice, would you like to give this a try?
Sure. What the question was, what are the biggest challenges facing MIL?
I think, yeah, probably the most primary ones. And I guess you've already shared about the challenges that you have in the US. Yeah. But what are the things that you could possibly foresee in the Philippine context that we should probably look into identifying and probably solving first?
Well, I can't speak to the Philippine context, though I'm very interested in learning from everyone here. But while I did share what some of the teachers in the US have shared as their concerns and difficulties with implementing media literacy, I think one of the big problems that we currently are dealing with, it was really captured by Dr. Joey, which is a lot of people thinking that media literacy means different things. And I really believe, based on research in other areas, that for an innovation, which I'm just calling media literacy here, the innovation, so something that might be new to teachers or organizations or systems, for that to spread, we know that we have to have some common language around it. We have to at least have some common understanding about what the terminology means. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but I think that is a great place to start. That's a big obstacle that I tend to face when I talk about media literacy.
Okay, got it. Now, what about you? Is Miss Yvonne Chua here? Miss Yvonne, I'd like to hear more about your take, particularly from the academe perspective, especially when it comes to integration, because a lot of the challenges that our educational system is already facing were already listed earlier by Dr. Alice. What about the Philippine context? What do you think should be the most immediate solution that we should adopt in our curriculums and in our academe?
First of all, I agree that the teaching of MIL should be expanded and should start in basic education. At the very least, at least if you want to start it, the starting age should be around 13 years old or junior high school when they go on social media. However, I believe that that's not the only time that we're exposed to media, and therefore we have to really roll it down to basic education. There are already existing models in other parts of the world. Finland, for example, has the highest media literacy index in Europe, and this has proved to help citizens withstand the onslaught of misinformation. So starting them young, even in primary grades, is important. Number two is to get the concept right. There's so many things to unpack in an MIL course. And I think one of the mistakes, having observed the educational system from my end, I was an education reporter when in my younger years during the Marcos era so I've seen how the curriculum has developed over time. I think one of the pitfalls in our education system is trying to cram too many things in one semester or in one school year. We have to unpack it slowly. And there are many opportunities to engage the students and the teachers For example, I've looked at some of our books in, say, as early as grade 1 or grade 2. When they start introducing, let's say, what is news or what is newspaper or what is television. However, what you notice is they introduce it and they use sometimes hypothetical situations. They don't use even real or real world situation, which is rather sad. So it brings to mind that curriculum developers and textbook writers ought to rethink the way they teach certain concepts, especially those that are related to MIL. That said, so that means that there has to be like throughout the education years. One thing that we also have to take into account is when we introduce MIL in senior high school, it might be too late. By then, we've lost a lot of students who might have dropped out, won't continue to junior high, or even stop schooling at grade 4, which has happened in some of the instances. So we really have to start them young. But another thing is also to rethink how we approach alternative learning system, introducing MIL in our ALS. We know if you look at and this wasn't mentioned by Dr. Alagara, but if you look at the curriculum for those in the alternative learning system that DepEd came up with, there's no mention of MIL. There is digital literacy or learning strand 6 for you to, proceed to college or to VocTech or a VocTech education, post-secondary. And what's taught there in digital literacy is not even accessing information. It's how to use hardware and software. And that hasn't been updated. But beyond that, we also have to look at, programs to reach the underserved groups. People with little education, with little access to information, so that they know when they come across information how to do that. But again, let me stress that MIL is a lifelong learning. It's lifelong learning. That means that even me, as well as Alice or Joey, we continue to learn. So MIL has to be integrated in all aspects of our lives. Many times the mistake that we make is to provide one-off training, one seminar, one webinar for a teacher, for students, and we think that's enough. That's not quite enough. Sorry for
Thank
saying a
you.
mouthful.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yvonne. Now let's jump into Dr. Joey. Are you already here?
Yeah,
Okay, got it, sir. So the question is still the same. What are the possible solutions to the identified issues that you have laid out earlier? Because you have presented a lot about the MIL curriculum design, but what's actually holding us back in terms of implementing this seamlessly? And what are the best solutions that we could actually offer in the short term?
uh, environment, and therefore everyone should be media conscious, or conscious at least of the ill effects of media. And this is a concern of everyone. And therefore, at the top level, the Department of Education should consider revising the curriculum guide the soonest possible time, because this is already, I think, 5th year of implementation of the old curriculum guide, and the fake news phenomenon is still not there. And we have to do that as soon as possible, because I was informed that the public school teachers are being evaluated on the basis of the curriculum guide. So, which means that if we don't really start with the revision of the curriculum guide, then we will not be able to make our students more critical and discriminating users of media and information. But anyway, in terms of the solution, yes, one is to revise the curriculum. Number two is to also train teachers how to be able to teach MIL, because as I mentioned, some of them would not have the capability yet to be able to teach MIL. No? In fact, in some cases, MIL is being offered to teachers as just so they would be able to comply with the needed number of units of teaching load. So in other words, there were instances when the qualifications of the teachers were not considered at all. So we have to train. We have to continue training our teachers. Number three, that we have to produce more materials in the local context, because that is something very important. The examples that are provided on the net are mostly foreign based. I think it's about time that we have to integrate local context, local situations in our materials. Number four, assessment of student performance, that they should not be assessed in terms of how good they were able to produce a video, because it's not the intention of the MIL. They are supposed to be evaluated in terms of how they were able to spot a fake news, how they were able to evaluate critically a media message, and how they were able to produce an alternative production to a particular message that is considered not ethical, not useful. So that's the reason why the creation part is there, because you have to initially understand how to analyze, so that you'll be able to determine if there's something wrong with the message. And out of that activity, then you will teach the student how to produce an alternative to that kind of production. It is not just any type of production. The production there, or the creation part, is supposed to be based on the previous analysis of a media message. So this is not a production course. So, well, some of the important steps that we also need to maybe empower also our message makers, to include the content creators from the mass media, from the public information sector. Uh, um, those who are also using information to be able to uh, uh, promote, or even to convince, how everybody can contribute to national development. No? Because the kind of message that we produce definitely will have an effect on the audience. So if we want our country to develop, then we also have to do something with our message production. But if we're not equipped with the skills needed, to be able to understand, analyze media messages, we will never be able to achieve all this. That's my take. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Joey. I'd like to remind our participants to use the Q&A option or feature here in Zoom, because some of our speakers are actually responding to your questions if you use the Q&A box. So I can see that Dr. Alice Fugi is already responding to some of the questions in the Q&A chat. So feel free to drop them there, but we're also going to be pulling some of the questions that you have. Now, those are very interesting insights coming from our speakers, and we want to make sure that all of your questions are covered. Let's jump to the next question. Now, this is a very critical question that we're facing right now. Disinformation, or more popularly called in the mainstream, fake news. Disinformation has never been more rampant than ever, that we now have coined the term disinfodemic, pertaining to the rise of fake news in the time of the pandemic. Why do you think such an unprecedented situation happened? And what can we learn from this moving forward? This question is actually going to cover a lot of the questions as well that are listed here in the Q&A, particularly about trolling, disinformation, fake news, and holding those fake news purveyors accountable and things like that. So why don't we get the insights from who wants to go first? Maybe Miss Yvonne would like to start.
Alice and I mentioned a number of factors before that give rise to misinformation or disinformation. In the case of the disinfodemic that accompanied the pandemic or the coronavirus pandemic, on top of what we've already mentioned, technology, the polarization and everything, is the presence of what we call data voids or data deficits. So then this is when you have a really high demand for information about the topic, in this case about the coronavirus, but there's still very little information or very little credible information about that. So there's a low supply. So there's a high demand for information, but there's a low supply. And what happens is malign actors move in and start populating, especially the online environment with all sorts of, including bad information. And so because there is a high demand, people start just putting any type of information out. They know that. And it's very easy to let search engines easily discover that, because that's the one thing that they come across right away in the absence of other credible information. So there's an explosion of bad information, and we know how the consequences of that. It could result in risky behavior, or risky behavior, or even risk-taking behavior. Like, for example, people begin to even believe that the pandemic doesn't exist, that the vaccines could lead to deaths unjustifiably or without reason. So these are things, and that's why it's important for people like us, especially those involved in information production, to ensure that we plug the deficits in order to avoid or help avoid or prevent a disinfodemic.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yvonne. I actually love the idea of data deficits, and it's very important that you bring it out in the open, because now people just are very confused about their sources of truth. And now that people are consuming more social media content than ever, we really need to make sure that we get to put veracity of information at the front. But what about you, Dr. Alice? What are your thoughts about this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I second Mrs. Yvonne about all of those comments. And I would just add, I mentioned in my presentation how important it is to think about media and information literacy, as did Dr. Joey. Think about it as integrated into all different subjects. I think part of this is because it's not currently integrated into science education, and at least in the US, we don't have as much attention on science as we do on some other subject areas. But if you think about how slowly science can move, like science is a process of questioning and finding answers, and it has to be, and that's important. And there are some reasons why sometimes it moves faster than others. But that's hard to have a nuanced conversation about in the public. So I think that adds another layer of challenge, is this idea of science around it, because we're learning about the coronavirus still today in real time. And so to be providing like updated information, it can make people nervous and make them not believe. So I think that's just one more layer of a challenge with this pandemic particularly.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Alice. What about you, Dr. Joey? What are your thoughts on disinformation and the rampant spread of fake news in the Philippines, especially now in this time of the pandemic, when a lot of people are very vulnerable to consuming fake news or false narratives?
But the explosion, so there is also information pollution. And I think that is something that we need to understand, that we are sometimes gullible to every message that we come across with on the internet. And this is happening maybe because sometimes we don't have the luxury of time to be able to check the information. We don't also have the skills to be able to fact check as well. No? So um, um, I believe that is very important to, as a first step, to accept the fact that mistakes can happen anytime, and that there could be some misinformation, disinformation, research
Dr. Joey, are you still here? I think we lost him one bit. Okay, definitely. We're gonna go back to Dr. Joey later on. Let's now jump to the next question. So, given the state of the Philippine media landscape right now, with the rampant spread of disinformation, we have the misinformation, and of course, we also have the malinformation. The question to ask is, what kind of media literacy interventions should we adopt both at the policy level and at the grassroots level, given this problematic media landscape that we have in the Philippines? Let's go back to Dr. Joey later on until he fixes his internet connection. We're probably going to ask Dr. Alice a little more about her observations about the Philippine media landscape, especially that she has shared to us a lot of the recommendations and the things that are going on in the US as well. What can we possibly adopt in the local level in terms of like shared similarities with the challenges that are easy to implement? And this would also answer a lot of the questions in the chat box about integration, particularly in terms of the educational curriculum. So Dr. Alice?
A lot of questions. At the policy level, we have different states in the US taking on different approaches. So we have Washington is a state that has been thought of as a leader in media literacy in the United States, and they have formed committees to sort of explore how they can integrate media literacy into all of their subject areas. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm having some tech problems too, so I'm sorry. Okay, so that's one approach. There are some other states that have tried to pass requirements to teach media literacy, and there are different ways that it could be integrated. For instance, we have like teacher evaluation systems, for better or worse, like most things, but some of those could include like a media literacy component so that teachers keep it in their minds that that's something that they should integrate into their work. That could be difficult because there are a lot of questions about teacher evaluations, but there are different approaches that could be taken. And I think at the state level in the US, that's pretty high up. It's going to be difficult to pass things at that level, especially right now in the United States. We're very divided. There are states where you can't read books. They're not allowed to have books in school that other states regularly are introducing to their students. So it's very divided. So thinking more about the grassroots level, I think communities could come together, and in the US we have school districts that might manage, I live in Los Angeles, they have several hundred schools in Los Angeles, and the district level might be more possible to start bringing policy there. The lever that you use and how you build the urgency for it, I think will have to be more specific to the context. So for example, I think in Los Angeles, that could be introduced. There might be meeting with the school board. Someone could introduce this idea, or someone could propose a bill or reach out in one of those ways. But that might not be as easy if you lived in a different community where they might be a little bit more reticent about adopting media literacy. So I'm not sure that that's helpful, but those are some of the like opportunities for introducing it as policy. I think it's tricky because as soon as you regulate something or require that people do it, sometimes it can transform into something new. So we just have to be careful and thoughtful about how we approach that. But in the US, there's no one concerted way.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, perfectly. Like what I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of shared challenges between the US and the Philippines. And I love your take about adopting context-specific solutions, like creating or conducting a meeting or consultative meeting with the school boards, for example, in the local districts. Those are very important, and especially that's going to capture the educated sector. But of course, we have the untouched sector, the blue-collar communities, or those out-of-school youths, the underprivileged communities in the grassroots as well. Now, let's jump to Miss Yvonne. This is particularly important, and you brought out and mentioned earlier that there was a lot of efforts in the past in terms of legislation to rally for penalizing fake news and false information. Actually, this was Senator Joey Villanueva who actually lobbied for the legislation against fake news. And this is actually raising a lot of questions about should we trust the government more in terms of being the source of truth, or in terms of like making sure that we get to regulate false news information or not? Or is there a better way or strategy like crowdsourcing? And this is very important, especially because there are a lot of stakeholders in that we have to take into account. So, Ms. Yvonne, what is your take in terms of the policy that we can adopt both on the national level, state level, and in the grassroots level? How do we also capture those audiences?
The reason why I want MIL initiatives to succeed is so that we don't have reason to pass a law against fake news or false information, disinformation. Our own experience with the Bayanihan Act, where we introduced the anti-fake news provision, was a disaster. We saw quite a number of cases filed against people, and this had little to do with disinformation. Sometimes this is because they were just critical of the government's response to COVID-19, and we don't want that to happen. So it's in our interest to make sure that media and information literacy initiatives at the policy level will fly or will take off. I mentioned, I mean, there have been a lot of suggestions. Alice's example of what's being done in Los Angeles is a good one. However, you know, my concern really is, and I defer to the wisdom of the teachers who are among us and librarians among us, but my own sense is the highly centralized educational system, public educational system that we have may work against, you know, putting in place rather rapidly the sort of MIL policy that we need. As we know, the curriculum was developed 5 years ago and nobody has really taken an effort. I mean, they've added a few subjects, but they can't change the syllabus entirely because they will be assessed on that curriculum. And that's also one of the pitfalls of having a highly centralized educational system. Everybody waits and people wait and see until what the national office would tell them to do. At the local level, even if they would like to undertake initiatives, I think there is hesitation. I've met quite a number of teachers who hesitate to do that, even if they could. So that's one thing to think about. Should we have, like Dr. Alagaran, Joey proposed, a department that does, if it will only centralize things further and make us less or respond less quickly to the situation, then no, we shouldn't have a department, but we should actually empower, decentralize more the MIL initiatives rather than wait for DepEd. For the grassroots level, I mentioned this, there is a lot of things that ought to happen, and this would now fall outside of the Department of Education, but they could do it as part of non-formal education. And this is where I think colleges and universities could think about their role instead in terms of extension activities for communities. But one thing I'd also like to throw at the audience, since there are quite a number of librarians, one of the questions people ask me when I talk to the communities is, so where do I get that information? They're not online. They just have their cell phone which they use for instant messaging. They don't know how to do research. And I hesitate when I tell them, go to your barangay leader or talk to your mayor, because I know they're highly partisan. In the case of public school teachers, they say they're so busy, so they don't have time to spend time with them. And this is where the absence of, or not really the absence, but where we don't have a really good library system nationwide is food for thought. I mean, is there something that we could do about our library? Should they rethink their role? If we have a public library in their bids, then that is also where MIL can take place. Another way for online, and this is just an approach, is Something I've used in class is the use of online games, gamification, because Filipinos are, after all, the biggest online, they're number one in the world when it comes to online gaming. So why not adopt that kind of format or technology to push MIL? Sadly, in our country, when it comes to disinformation, there's, I think, only one online game or two online games, and they're not really that effective. One is really highly political. In my class, I give my students in the fact-checking class two options, two games that they could use with. And sadly, the one that they prefer to use is the Newsfeed Defenders by iCivics of the US, which was founded by the late Supreme Court Justice Sandra O'Connor, because it's effective. How I wish there was something similar to that we could roll out in our schools. Again, sorry for the mouthful.
No, this is very important, and I'm actually loving the momentum that we're building up here, especially the very practical examples that came from you, Miss Yvonne. But now I have two very specific questions to Dr. Joey. Dr. Joey, I hope you can hear me. Two questions. First is, can librarians be involved in the development of the MIL curriculum? This is a question that's been going on in the chat. And secondly, apart from the DepEd and the UNESCO MIL curriculum, are there any other sources that may be used as basis for the topics that can be taught in this junior high school and other and the primary education in terms of equipping them with their learning competencies?
Sorry, I didn't get the first one.
Oh, the first question, sir, is about librarians being involved in the development of the MIL curriculum. They're asking how can they possibly contribute in the designing of the MIL curriculum?
Definitely, we should involve librarians in the design of the curriculum guide. Uh, a merging of two concepts, media literacy and information literacy. And we know that information literacy is the domain of the librarians, archivists, among others. So we should maybe, because I'm not from the Department of Education, it's only the Department of Education which can decide on this. But hopefully the DepEd could invite librarians group to be part of the committee that will revise the curriculum guide. But from my end, I definitely welcome the idea that librarians be involved because they know better the concept of information literacy and how this can be integrated across the different courses in the curriculum. So I think they should be involved. They should be more involved. And then for the second question, sorry, I forgot the second question.
Yes, sir. The second question was about other sources aside from DepEd and UNESCO that can be a basis in the design of this curriculum.
Okay. As I presented earlier, I offered the idea to adopt the UNESCO framework as a framework for the curriculum guide. But of course, there are other sources of information that we can use. No? Of course, let us not forget the Center for Media Literacy, which started the MIL movement in the U.S. And then that's on the internet, and also we have resources from Canada because in the world, the most successful or one of the very first implementers of MIL education was US. Now, but of course, there are other two countries involved in MIL education. Among the first, we have Canada, we have and also uh, Australia. And then others followed suit, like the UK. UK has a very good set of materials also on MIL. This is, I think, the Media Clearinghouse, if I'm not mistaken. That one is being hosted by Frank Baker, who founded the Media Literacy Council in the UK. There are other sources from the West, but I also hope that you would tap Eastern resources for MIL curriculum development. Singapore is the only Southeast Asian country that created a media literacy council. So they have their own media literacy council. If I'm not mistaken, that's under their Ministry of Information. But Singapore is very successful in that. And then at the right now there is a movement called ASEAN Media and Information Literacy Network. This was initiated by Malaysia. So hopefully we could also learn from Malaysia. But actually we're the only ones in Southeast Asia which offers MIL in the basic education sector. So the neighboring countries do not have MIL in their curriculum, but they have integrated MIL across the curriculum, and that is also something that we are looking at. In terms of other resources, there have been resources like your own organization, no? The Break the Fake movement, the Out of the Box initiative. What else? The National Council for Children's Television, although that is very limited to television watching. What else? And some other Asian Institute of Journalism and Communication also produce news literacy videos. So there are materials available locally that we can use to be able to improve the design of our curriculum guide.
Thank you so much, sir. I actually forwarded some links as well that could possibly help you in terms of researching more on media and information literacy. And like what Dr. Jose has actually shared to us, it's very important that we look beyond those resources that we are actually consuming from the umbrella level and the national level, the DepEd and UNESCO, and try to do your own due diligence in terms of researching the most verified and highly qualified information you could actually find online. Now let's go to the next question. This is about what's happening around the world. What can you say about the rise of new trends in online engagement, such as call out, cancel culture, smart shaming, and others? Let's try to flash this question. Okay, there you go. So maybe let's start this time with Dr. Alice.
Sure. I don't know that I can speak to call out and cancel culture, smart shaming well as a researcher. I have my own personal opinions about it, but I actually don't think that they're very valid for everyone to take as an expert. However, I think that smart shaming is part of the truth decay that we just spoke about, and this like movement toward attempting to discredit experts, which makes it difficult to spread information. If something comes from the organization that I work for, some people who we're hoping it reaches won't want to read it. If it comes from a university professor, some people that they're hoping will read it won't want to, because I think that's related to the smart shaming and this lack of appreciation for some of the common practices involved in science, research, journalism, maybe a lack of understanding around them, but a general lack of trust in sort of institutions where we regularly receive our news and information. Whereas in the past, somebody might have trusted what comes out of a university or, a well-respected newspaper. That's become less so. So I do think that's linked to this more like casual smart shaming that you mentioned here. But that's really all I've got on it.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Alice. Actually, this is a big thing that's been going on in our democracy right now, especially how it's very closely tied up to our freedom of expression and the limits towards how we actually engage with the online community. So how do we adopt an online netiquette? So let's hear from Miss Yvonne Chua. What's your thoughts on these crucial topics? Call out, cancel culture, smart shaming, while we are still talking about becoming a responsible digital citizen? Is this part of the entire tenet of that responsible digital citizenship?
Certainly not, right? I mean, we need to avoid, smart shaming, call out. Well, call out depending, but certainly smart shaming and cancel culture should not be part of what we engage in. In the case of smart shaming, it disturbs us a lot. This has happened with a number of our politicians, and we saw it during the elections as well, when there's you can say anti-intellectualism, and this would discourage people from striving to be smart because there's suddenly a negative stereotype of smart people. Um, and it really confuses people about the importance of learning when you do smart shaming. So that concerns me a lot. That bothers me a lot. As for the call out culture, I mean, I think some people call out because they're well meaning. They know that what they said might have been wrong, and they try to correct that person in the hope that the correction would stay there and people would access that. So it's a form of holding people to account. However, I think it's the way you call out people that we have to be conscious about. And that's where netiquette comes in, right? Try to engage in a discourse. Don't show your bias, right? Try to speak from the heart. Like I said, be empathetic. As for the cancel culture, I know it's like this is where people's excuse is we can't stand that person anymore, so we cancel that person or ostracize. But in effect, this closes the door on discourse, and I think that's rather sad when we end the conversation without we end everything without even starting to make people understand. But at the same time, it's again something we need to think about. But there are, because of the cancel culture that we have these days, especially during the elections, the burning question right now is how do we reach out to the person that we cancel? Is it all right, right? Some people refuse to reach out anymore. I think that's a shame. I think we should allow ourselves to, when our emotions, when we've calmed down, our emotions have subsided, is to again reach out to people and continue the conversation.
Especially. Yeah, I particularly love the insights from Ms. Yvonne on the anti-intellectualism, and then how we shouldn't actually speak crass language. We want to make sure that once we engage with our audiences, we still are going to be like are able to keep our composure, because we have to be very careful about the people who are listening to our feedback on once we engage with the people with the different online personalities. So we want to make sure that we are not closing the discourse, we're not shutting down doors. But what about you, Dr. Joey? What are your thoughts on these three new trends in online engagement?
Okay. Um, touching we can do anything in using the social media and the internet. I think it's really important that we should be conscious of the effects of what we're going to say, what we're going to share, and also what we're going to do online. So we have to be more ethical, as mentioned. But this is something that is not yet ingrained in the culture of most Filipino netizens, that they are not really conscious of the need to be more ethical and more yeah, as mentioned by Dr. Yvonne, empathetic. I think it should also be part of how the of parenting, in other words, which means that there should be some kind of parental mediation, especially for the young users of social media and the internet, that at an early age, the parents should be able to uh, teach or train our young netizens how to be able to deal with people, with messages online, no? And that they should be more respectful, more empathetic, and more careful about the things that they say and they do online. No? But again, this is supposed to be a very important role that the education sector should also take on. No? That although there is freedom of expression, that for every freedom there should be responsibility. So it's not always an absolute freedom. So at the very start, the the users of the internet should be able to realize that although they have a new platform through which they would be able to communicate with people, they should be more careful also and more conscious of what they are going to do online, because there is also such a thing as cyber ethics or even online ethics. So, and this is not yet being discussed in the basic education level. Most of the time, it's just about how to use technology, but the aspect of ethics, no, the aspect of ethics is not there, especially when digital literacy is taught in the elementary level. The aspect of ethics is not there. I think apart from what was mentioned by Dr. Yvonne, no, I think there's also a need to integrate digital citizenship at an early age, no, in the basic education curriculum. We in the ALS there's digital literacy, but if you're going to review the content of the digital literacy, it's about technology literacy. I think there's another thing that digital literacy is not about it's not about technology literacy. It is about how to um, how to live in the digital age, no, and that's part of digital citizenship, no, and at the same time how to be able to be more responsible, ethical, and safe in the use of the internet. This should be part of the digital literacy curriculum. But if you're going to look at it again, it's really focused on technology. I think it's also important now to revise that curriculum on digital literacy being offered in the alternative learning system. But again, my take is at an early age, the children should be taught how to deal with social media, that the parents have an important role to play in the making sure that the children are using it more responsibly, and that the school system, no, the education sector, and the church as well, all other social institutions do play an important role in trying to educate the children and the youth in the use of social media. The aspect of call out, cancel, because well, they think that it's something normal to do it online because maybe that's how they do it offline. But then again, it's a different platform and the entire world gets to see your postings. It's important to also consider the fact that you are what you do online. No? So we have to be conscious of that.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Joey, for all of those insights and recommendations. And I love the take about the shared responsibility between the home, the parents, and then the school when it comes to values education. And also the idea about infusing online ethics as early as primary education and digital citizenship as well. So this is a very engaging discussion so far. And we are now down to our last question. I know that we have a lot of questions about media angles. How do we make media outlets accountable, especially our take on media being vilified right now, the lack of trust with traditional media, and as well as certifying body for international accreditation for fact checkers. All of those questions are in the Q&A facility. So I'm hoping that the speakers can actually take their time to respond to some of those questions. In the interest of time, we are going to actually ask the last question for our speakers, and we will also ask them to share their parting messages as well to our participants. So the last question is, how can we continue to empower ourselves and others in the search for truth? So we'd like to start with Dr. Alice
I think this is such a good question, especially not just empower ourselves, but empower others. I will say that I think truth is obviously a loaded word. I would say in the search for facts, and perhaps in the search for questioning. I think if we could develop a better questioning mindset, that would help us get a very long way. One of the issues that I think is part of our cognitive biases is just that it's hard to backtrack on what we've said, right? Like people, it takes some humility to recognize when something changes or you've learned new information, you need to update your opinion. So I think like each of us could model that by continuing to question and not stand so firm in what we believe to be true, but to be consistently looking for what are the facts that we have evidence for and what does that mean for the community. So I suppose I would say that is just encourage questioning among your friends and family and build those questioning techniques yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Alice. Now let's proceed with Miss Yvonne. The same question and parting messages as well.
Again, first of all, Joey, let me correct you. Thank you for promoting me, but I don't have a doctorate. And we're friends, so just call me Yvonne. But as for the question of how we empower ourselves and others in the search for truth, let me speak as a journalist. Let me wear my journalist hat. I've been a journalist for 42 years now. And one of the most important skills that is being emphasized at the moment is news literacy. It's not teaching people how to be a journalist, but teaching citizens skills that journalists do to evaluate information. Because, journalism, good journalism, is actually the only profession that professes or is committed to truth seeking and truth telling. That means to get the facts right, to get them right, and to tell them right. And what are the skills that we need to live by if we want to keep searching for the truth? One is to always have a verification mindset. And that means, like I said, if information comes our way, let's not accept it hook, line, and sinker. Number two is, of course, like any good journalist would do, is to engage in multiple sourcing. Not just rely on one source, and not just rely on one source that you like. You also have to be open to other or multiple perspectives. Then look for evidence, and that means documentation, the data, other forms of evidence that would back that information. But at the same time, we also always have to situate information in its context, in the correct context, because the information could be right, but if it's taken out of context, then we would also be deceived by actors. And then, of course, it means also being open-minded, and that means being fair and balanced, and to be able to rise above our biases. So I've learned that in the last so many years since I was in J school back in the 1970s, even when it was still martial law, and I still continue to live by it. I'm not saying that I always know the truth, but it has helped me ferret out what is false from what is real. It really has helped me a lot. And I hope that you would also begin to acquire that sort of verification mindset.
Thank you, Ms. Yvonne. Adopting a questioning mindset and a critical thinking is really very important right now. Let's now go with Dr. Joey. Dr. Joey, are you here?
Hello. I
Yes, sir.
also share the insights mentioned by Professor Yvonne, okay, Professor Yvonne, and because I also teach news literacy, but empowerment is about understanding and taking action. That in that you have to initially understand what you are into, and then you have to assess the situation and make important decisions out of it. We cannot make important decisions if we are not properly informed. So we have to understand what it is and then before we make informed decisions about it. So in the same manners, when we teach students about the need to be news literate individuals, we also want them to be more conscious not only of the textual information that they come across with or the news item that they come across with, but also the images that they see online, because some of which are not really legitimate, and some of which are really fake. So it's really about both knowing how to evaluate both the textual information and the images. And then, okay, so with that, I really would like to thank everyone for this opportunity to be able to share some important insights regarding media information literacy education in the Philippines. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much as well, Dr. Joey. That is such a wonderful discussion, everyone. And let us now proceed with our panel reaction. We have invited a student to share his thoughts and realizations based on the discussion that happened earlier. And to lead a panel reaction is no other than Mr. Stephen Rowan, Assistant Vice President for Event Management of the Organization for American Studies. Let's all give him a virtual applause.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everyone. Disinformation destroys democracy, and it is indeed high time for us to address this phenomenon. I would like to extend my appreciation to our panelists, Dr. Alice, Ms. Yvonne, and Dr. Joey, for a very fruitful and engaging discussion this morning, and to this morning's attendees from various schools and universities in the Philippines, as well as those who tuned in from different time zones. To respond on Dr. Alice's very detailed and database discussion on truth decay, teachers, particularly secondary school teachers, indeed play a very critical role in addressing the truth decay. And integrating media literacy skills is the most effective way, and it can be integrated into competencies from numerous classes, may it be science class, math class, English class, and social studies class. And students can be taught or trained with the necessary skills to properly discern and digest information, and indeed only share information or in person that is based on credible and factual information. This is particularly important in the Philippines, considering we have the so-called chismis culture or the gossip culture that has propagated a culture of sharing unverified information to peers, which has arguably made sharing misinformation easier. On Ms. Yvonne Chua's discussion on detailing the network disinformation in the country and identifying what are the factors that contributed to its rise, as well as identifying what could be done to address it, it is indeed undeniable that misinformation has risen over the past few years, which was catapulted by the 2016 Philippine presidential elections, the 2019 senatorial elections, as well as and this was exacerbated even by the discussions surrounding the coronavirus pandemic and the recent 2022 Philippine presidential elections, where some actors of misinformation are in the government. And it is the ordinary people that fall prey to these instigated acts of content fabrication and misleading claims, with a huge number of Filipinos in social media and a good number of Filipinos finding difficulty in spotting or identifying fake news or misinformation. It is no wonder why social media sites such as Facebook and YouTube, which are among the widely accessed social media networks, they rank highest where misinformation is prevalent the most. And on Dr. Joey Alagaran's suggestions on how the MIL curriculum in the Philippines could be improved and expanded. Having a media and information literary course in basic education indeed is a good start, especially in addressing the ever-growing concerns brought by mass media and social media. But indeed, improvements could be made and implemented in addressing new concerns, such as misinformation. And despite media and information literacy being part of the Department of Education's K-12 curriculum, the competencies taught in this course largely differs from UNESCO's framework for media and information literacy. And true enough, MIL isn't just about media literacy, it isn't just about information literacy, and not just about digital literacy, but MIL as a composite concept should empower individuals to be more critical of the information they digest, that as we teach these students to produce mass media, the information they share should come from competent authority, and that they create credible and responsible media content. And in the same sense, they in turn should assess the information they receive and digest it critically. This goes back to the discussion of Dr. Hugi, that integrating media literacy skills to the competencies from various classes such as science class, math class, English class, social studies class, and this could be taught as early as age 11, which is also the time that they are exposed to social media. But as we impart the necessary competencies and skills to students, as well as trained teachers for competencies for MIL, as we advocate for the expansion and improvement of media and information literacy curriculum in our basic education, I hope we could also address the possibility and instances where, despite teachers and the authorities being equipped with the necessary competencies and skills, and even trained with advanced competencies, these quote unquote competent authorities or people in the academies are the one who are sometimes purveyors of misinformation. And this is important as they have the potential to influence misinformation to their students or their peers. Our discussion today calls upon us to responsibly digest the information we browse, especially in social media. And we should also take it upon ourselves to be more critical of the information we share online and in person, so that we find it difficult to combat. And if so, that we find it difficult to combat misinformation ourselves, we may not contribute it. We may not contribute to them anymore. Thank you, everyone, and good morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rowan, for your very detailed and meaningful feedback about the discussion. Now, before we proceed, I'd like to share to you, everyone, that due to unfavorable circumstances, Dr. Alton Grizel, our supposed keynote speaker, will not be able to join us in this summit, but he's definitely with us, with us in spirit in achieving our mission for today. To extend our warmest gratitude to our speakers, and today we'd like to present the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Alice Fugi, Ms. Yvonne Chua, and Dr. Joserio Ben Alagaran II for lending us their expertise as resource speakers, and to Mr. Stephen Rowan as a student panel reactor for a virtual learning session entitled InformNation, Information and Media Literacy Summit 2022, given its 27th day of May 2022 online, signed by the Director of Libraries in American Corner Manila, Ms. Christine Abrigo, Associate American Corner Librarian, Ms. Ruana Marie Flores, and the President of the LSU's the Organization for American Studies, Mr. Jose Barreto. Once again, thank you to our panelists and student panel reactor. Now, for our participants, in order for you to receive your digital certificate, make sure that you accomplish our online evaluation flashed on the screen. The link is www.bit.ly/information02. So make sure that you take note of that particular link so you will be able to unlock your digital certificate. And of course, as for our DLSU student attendees, please accomplish the incentive link provided on the screen. That's bit.ly/incentive03. So make sure that you take a snapshot of that particular link so that you will be able to get your incentive. And now to officially end our program, let us call Mr. Jose Barreto, the president of the Organization for American Studies of the De La Salle University, to deliver the closing remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Organization for American Studies at De La Salle University, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all of you for attending today's event. At this juncture, we have reached the end of a very enlightening discussion. I would like to extend my gratitude to our resource speakers, Dr. Alice Fugi, Ms. Yvonne Chua, and Dr. Joey Alagaran, for taking the time out of their busy schedules to share their knowledge and expertise on today's topic. Our discussion today exposes how widespread disinformation has led to the decay of truth in today's digital age. In the Philippines, the past years have displayed how the emergence of trolls and the spread of fake news has undermined democracy. Because of this, our esteemed speakers have emphasized the importance of media literacy education for students in an effort to protect democracy, and how we ourselves should remain cautious regarding the information we share in order to ensure we are not contributing to the cycle of disinformation. Thus, as we continue to champion credible information despite a very volatile digital environment, may those who are responsible for the distribution of misinformation be held accountable for their actions in the years to come. With that said, before we conclude, I would like to thank today's event organizer, Ms. Rowana Flores, and further extend my gratitude to those who have been involved in the successful implementation of this event: American Corner Manila, De La Salle University Libraries, the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines, American Spaces Manila, YC Philippines, and the Organization for American Studies and its officers. Thus, as we've come to an end, I hope that today's discussion will enlighten all of us to move forward with the ideas presented and aim to fight against the dissemination of disinformation. Thank you and have a pleasant rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jose Barreto, the president of the Organization for American Studies of De La Salle University. Now, before we take off, DLSU's Organization for American Studies invites everyone to their virtual learning session entitled Cyber Conflict, the Future of Modern Warfare, happening today at 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. This is exciting, guys, as they will be talking about what lies ahead for all of us in the area of information. So I hope you'll join this event. American Corner Manila, or AC Manila, is also having their upcoming event on July 14, 2022 from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. So take note of the date. This is another informative session, guys. The event title is Forging Ahead, Building a Stronger Fight Against Trafficking in Persons. So watch out for it. Now, if you want to be updated with LSU's Organization for American Studies upcoming events, you may follow them on their Facebook page at amstud.dlsu. For AC Manila, their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account handle is at acmanilaph. And that wraps up our program today. It's so refreshing to see the energy of our audience as well as our speakers who are all here for a shared mission. And that is to support the mainstreaming of media and information literacy. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending our program today. At this point, let's have our photo opportunity with our speakers. Give us your best smiles for 20 seconds while our tech team takes some screenshots. So let's slowly open our cameras, everybody. I guess everybody is wearing their best smile already. And I guess our tech team is already making sure that everyone is going to be captured in our screenshots for the photo op. Okay.
All right, in the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, smile. Last one. 1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So that ends our program this morning. Once again, thank you very much to all our speakers and participants in Zoom. The Information, and Media Literacy Summit 2022 has finally concluded. This event is brought to you by the De La Salle University Libraries, U.S. Department of State, American Spaces Philippines, American Corner Manila, and the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, or YCLE. And again, my name is Gab of the Break the Fake movement. Goodbye, have a nice day, and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.